So my name's Sally Nelson, and I teach pastoral care and Christian doctrine at St Hilde College, which is partnered with Northern Baptist College, and we have some students there for ministry formation for Baptist ministry. I did my research on some aspects of narrative and suffering because I'd worked in a hospice for some years. Okay, well, I always think it's interesting to look at what's happening and then to try and explore some of the theological ideas that might lie behind it. And so I suppose I noticed three main things. The first thing is that when something happens, our society tends to look for somebody to blame. So what is it or who is it that's caused this problem? And I think that's helpful up to a point, because it can assist us in mitigating future problems that are similar. But the trouble is, it still leaves you with the pain of the loss or the suffering. So, for example, the losses of the COVID situation. Some people have lost loved ones, some people have lost their jobs, some people have lost their mental well-being. And whoever is to blame, those things are still there and still have to be dealt with. If you think about a law court, after somebody is deemed to be perhaps guilty of a crime, there's intellectual closure, but I think there is still emotional work to be done. The questions are still there to some extent. So I'm interested in a response to COVID or other disasters that is shaped by the life of Christ, and how would that be different? And well, would it be different, and how would that be different? Well, first of all, I think lockdown has provided us with a really unique opportunity, both just to sort of hit pause and reflect on what's been happening. But it's also just an unprecedented time of global uncertainty. We've never been here before, and that's a really new experience, and it's quite a frightening experience as well. So I think that's something really unique that we can engage with, and I'll just offer that as an observation at this stage. Secondly, there were these interesting stories about the greater uptake of what the church was offering digitally. So at one point, something like a quarter of the population was thought to have gone online and experienced a church service. So a door potentially has opened, and it will be interesting to see whether we can continue to work with that opportunity as time goes forward. I think further, we are the body of Christ. And I think there are some interesting reflections around what that actually means. And sometimes when we think of ourselves as the body of Christ, I wonder if we tend to think of the resurrected and glorious Christ, but maybe don't think so much about what came before that. And the body of Christ actually received the wounds of Jesus. And a big bit of what I was saying in the piece was that instead of looking for somebody to blame, there is a big piece of work in hearing stories and sort of holding that pain alongside other people. And maybe we can see that in the life of Jesus and put it to work for us in this time. There is suffering alongside joy, and we hold those two things together. I think that is a difficult thing for 21st century culture to hear and to really embrace and live within. Maybe that's something that the church, the body of Christ, can really bring. Further, if we explore a theology of suffering, there are voices that say that suffering can lead to change, and the outcome of suffering can be positive, even if the suffering is quite bad. But in order for that to happen, that story of suffering has to be told and received. And again, I like to think about the parallels with the literal body of Christ, that he received the wounds of his crucifixion and retained those even into his resurrection. There was something about that painful story that was really received. And can we not just tell the good news story, which we're very good at already, but actually receive the stories of suffering from other people and be the body of Christ in that way as well? So it's something about a two-way communication. It's the thing that we're already good at, telling, proclaiming the good news story, but also receiving back contextually the stories of others who have been hurt. Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that I often really think about, which I find very challenging as a minister and also as a theologian, is who is actually heard. And this is a good question, not just for church, but anywhere in any forum of any part of society. But we're thinking about church right now. Who is heard? Who has the opportunity to be heard in our churches? And are there people who are not heard? And there's all sorts of ways that we can not hear people. We can do it quite subtly by just feeling that certain things are prioritized over other things, and maybe not inspecting those often enough. So I think that might be a really good question to ask. You know, are the voices that we are filtering out or drowning out that we should be reclaiming at this time? And that's a generic challenge, not just about COVID, but maybe COVID has initiated that. Secondly, how can we listen better to those voices? There is no one size fits all response to this, I think. It's all has to be worked out contextually. And one of the things that I've noticed with students is that there's a bit of a disillusionment with taking a programme off the shelf and applying it, because all programs are developed in a context and work well in that context. They're not always as easy to transfer into another context. So it's about looking around us and saying, you know, what voices are here? What voices are around my church or my community? What voices do we need to hear? And how can we facilitate that conversation? And if it's as simple as listening skills, there's all sorts of ways that those can be improved and developed, but it might be a little bit more complicated than that. It might be about thinking about exclusion and groups and that kind of thing. And I think finally, really to hammer home the fact that we are Jesus shaped, we are the body of Christ, and Jesus' story shapes our story. But we are called to do that with our hearts, our minds, our souls and our strength. And I'm a real passionate advocate of some good theological input in there somewhere along the way. So to include voices from people who have really thought deeply about these things alongside people who perhaps haven't ever thought about them before at all. So having that mixture of voices of those who are really thinking theologically and those who are speaking from their experience and everything in between, that's fantastic. That's Baptist, that's congregational. And to study Jesus and learn to love him better is always a good thing.